Welcome to the second season of Trophy Moments and a Few Firsts with me, Keith Baldwin. Sponsored by Spikes Trophies, where you can reach Spikes at gospikes.com or one of the 3 locations in the Delaware Valley. Okay, today, our guest, my special guest, is my first executive chef, and his name is Kevin Garvin. Kevin's a lifelong friend that I've known since I was very little. And he recently retired as the VP of Corporate Food Services for Neiman Marcus. He's the author of multiple cookbooks, and he's here to tell us, how did you get from Piccolo's Pizza at 14 years old to become an executive chef? Born and raised in Northeast Philadelphia, Kevin Garvin. How did you make that journey?
How did I make that journey? I think you and I, didn't we both apply for the same job?
Yes, we walked in the door to that pizza place in Northeast Philly when we were 14 years old.
Yeah.
You got the job. I didn't. I ended up going on to the place that I ended up spending over 50 years of my life. So yes, that was a fateful day for both of us.
It sure was. And, a lot of it, I just, thank God for what happened. But, I walked in there and just felt at home right away. So that's where it started. And I got
You didn't intend to be a chef, correct?
Well, listen, you have to pay your dues. So I did that. And it's not all, everything you see on television, but, the thing that made the pizza place, kind of stick in my mind and what I loved about it is just the people, you stay at a job because you love the job and you have fun. And that was a job that I had a lot of fun with. And, they would give me the summers off. So I would go down the shore into Ocean City, and I worked at Watson's restaurant right off the boardwalk at 9th and Ocean. And so I would work there in the summer and then come home and work at Piccolo's. And the other thing cool was Piccolo's. Remember, it was right around the corner from the playground, right? Lackman,
Yes.
Remember?
Yep.
So they
That's
would
why we
actually
walked
give
there.
me nights off to go play basketball or whatever I wanted to do over there. So I really had the best bosses in the world. And to this day, I thank them for, being the leaders that they were to make it so much fun for me.
So you're 14 years old. How long were you there till you went to the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York?
So when I got out of Ryan, before I got out of Ryan, remember we used to have to sit with counselors.
Yes.
And I told the counselor I wanted to go to cooking school, and he was really upset because nobody was going to cooking school in 1976 or 75 when we started looking, remember? And so there was a little school up in Hyde Park, New York that nobody really knew about. And so I decided that that was going to be for me. So that was only a 2-year program. So, and I really wanted the college scene. So remember, there was another school that was starting in Philadelphia in the early 70s called the Philadelphia Restaurant School.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down there, scoped that out, went up to Johnson Wales in Providence, Rhode Island. Then when I drove onto the campus in Hyde Park, New York, which was actually just a beautiful place, I said, this is for me. So that's when I was, I guess, right after high school, I went up to the Culinary Institute of America. And at that point, young American cooks were just not a thing. So it was still very much ran by the Europeans when I got there. So it was a great experience, and got me out of Philly for a while.
And then you traveled to many places. You were in Vermont, Colorado, Hawaii, Minnesota, Ohio, and you end up in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, and I'm still not a full-blown cowboy fan. Okay, so just let's just get that out there. Okay, it's very hard living in Dallas for the last 35 years, and rooting for the Cowboys sometimes, and rooting for the Eagles, and I'm very torn at times. But when I got out of CIA in 1978, that's what we call the Culinary Institute. What was so much fun about that is that I was able to put that diploma in my back pocket and really just take off around the country. So my goal was to learn how to snow ski. And remember, when you and I were growing up, we would just go down the hill on the street in front of our house, right? So I got out there and I was going to tear up the mountain. So I moved to Stowe right out of culinary school and actually was a summer camp cook at a youth conservation corps. The building is still there up on the Snow Mountain Road. And I worked there for about 10 or 12 weeks. And then I went down the road to Top Notch and I worked for a European chef there. But going back, I have to tell you a funny story because I read your book and I loved it, by the way. Great job. I mean,
Thank you.
talk about, being vulnerable and just telling it like it is. Congratulations. So, when on my in my summers, I worked at Watson's and the guy by the name of John Feffley was the owner of it. And he would go down to Coral Gables in the winter, come back up to Ocean City in the summer. And one of the guys that I worked with in that kitchen was Paul Kurtz, who was in your book, the guy, the radio guy. And
Yes.
I thought, and I'm reading your book and I'm going, Paul Kurtz, I can't believe it. So, Paul, there was a whole bunch of guys from Roxborough that worked at Watson's, and Paul was one of them. So I had to give Paul a shout out because I know that he was a big part of your book when he came to interview you. So
Yes.
anyway, so that was kind of a moment there. But so I go up to Vermont, I go skiing, I have a great time, and then I wanted to ski some really important snow, so I go out to Steamboat Springs, and I get to Steamboat. Actually, I was living in Denver, and I kept going up to Steamboat, and then one day I decided I'm just going to drive up there, and I went into a hotel and got a job as a sous chef, and then started working in Steamboat, skiing some real snow, and then a friend of mine called me and said, "Why don't you come to Hawaii?" So that was like 1983, 84. So I get on a plane. I wind up on the island of Kauai, Poipu Beach, and all of these moments were amazing learning experience for me, and really I think what was the most important were the people that I worked with, and not only worked with but worked for a lot of great bosses. And I really think that when I got a chance to become a leader, I was able to take the things that I learned from both good bosses and bad bosses and kind of put it together and hopefully become the person that people want to work with. And so, I spent a great deal of time on the island of Kauai in Poipu Beach, and it really taught me how to listen and be a kinder person. We grew up in Philly, we're a little rough around the edges sometimes, and I get to Hawaii, and people are very chill. And I had to really learn how to slow down and be a little kinder to people, which I think really did me well. And then, and then I got a job offer to move to Minneapolis in the middle of February. So I literally leave
Oh,
Kauai,
so
go
you go from Hawaii to
to
Minnesota. How many?
Minneapolis in the middle of the winter, and that was a promotion, believe it or not. So I get there and it's cold and it's snowing and it's awful. But I worked in a great hotel, worked for a great boss, and this is the guy who taught me how to carve ice. So I became an ice carver in Minneapolis, and I had a great time. I carved 5 or 6 blocks of ice every Saturday for Sunday brunch, and that's how I spent my Saturdays with a chainsaw carving ice. So, you know,
I didn't know that about you. I didn't know that you were an ice
I was
carver.
an ice carver, and it's funny when my son went to school, and you do when your parents come to school, what is it called, career day, right?
Yes.
So my son was in first grade, and my wife Jody says to me, "What are you going to do?" And we decided that I was going to carve ice for the kids on career day. And turns out that it was so loud in the front yard of the school that the whole school came out and watched. But they still talk about the dad who came with an ice carving, and it was a
What
lot of
did you
fun.
carve?
I carved an
What did you carve?
eagle because the school mascot was an eagle, and I was pretty good at eagles, so I carved this eagle out of ice. But yeah, it was. But being a chef, you have to learn all kinds of things. So I worked in Minneapolis, and I loved Minneapolis. It was a great town. But somebody offered me a job to go to Cincinnati, Ohio. So literally in a 10-year period, I had 5 jobs. And I wind up going to Cincinnati, Ohio, which was actually a very, very good food town. Cincinnati had more five-star restaurants per capita than any other city in the United States at one point. So big food town, loved it there. And then from there, I got a job offer to come to Dallas. And There's a couple of people that I worked with along the way that were really amazing people. One of them was named John Bonchet. He was a French chef. He owned a restaurant in Chicago called La Francais, and he was our consultant chef at the Adolphus in Dallas. The Adolphus was actually built by Adolphus Bush from the Bush family. That was his summer residence in Dallas. And so I worked at the Adolphus for about 5 years. That's where I met my wife, Jody, who was the food and beverage director at the time. And she was funny. She was my boss, and so I reported to her. And 5 years later, we got married. Now there was a period where she left for a while but yeah, wound up marrying Jody, and we have our oldest son now is 30 years old. But that was a great, great time for us. But when you think about it, Keith, there's mentors in your life, right? I mean, certain people in your life that you think about, well into your old age. And I'm sure you've got a few, but getting ready for this phone call, I thought to myself, who was the earliest mentor, somebody that I looked up to? And I don't know if you remember this guy's name was the Galloping Gourmet, Graham Kerr. Do you remember him?
Yes. Yes.
So I Googled him last night. He's 90 years old, still alive.
Still alive?
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
And that show was on from 68 to 69 or 68 to 72. Don't quote me. But remember coming home from school in the afternoon and turning the TV on, and he was always on in the afternoon. Remember? And I was the guy, I was the kid, I was what, 10, 11 years old, watching the Graham Kerr Galloping Gourmet. Remember him? So
Yes.
so
Yes.
so he checks into the Adolphus Hotel. Fast forward, I don't know how many years, 1988, 1989. I hear he's checking into the hotel. I tell the front desk people, you got to let me know when he checks in. I want to come up and shake his hand. And sure enough, he came up and they said, our chef wants to meet you. And it was the coolest moment, when I was able to actually stand in front of that guy and talk to him. And he was still just as pleasant as ever, and just a funny, funny guy. But he was the guy that probably, the first guy that probably got me interested, because I thought, how cool is he? He's running around in the kitchen having a lot of fun, and he had a glass of wine in his hand, remember? Now, fast forward, he gave up alcohol, okay? So he's sober now. And that's probably why he's still alive. But anyway, that was a fun story. And when you think about some of the other mentors in your life, John Bonchet, I mentioned him, he was one of them. And then there was just a whole bunch of them that I worked for, and they were all Europeans, and they were all crazy. But people ask me a lot. They say to me, well, do you watch The Bear, or do you watch this show, or do you watch that show? And quite honestly, I've never watched any TV Food Network since it came on 30 plus years ago. It's not something that I would come home and want to do. And, when you think about it, why do people watch some of those shows? And, because they think the guys in the kitchen are crazy. They love seeing that mayhem, right? And I have to tell you, I think that some of those shows probably have done more harm for my business than they've done good for our business. Because when you think about it, it really sensationalizes marginal behavior in many ways. And it's something that bugged me, and I just never subscribed to it. I never took the time to want to sit down and watch something. Now, listen, they're all, I'm sure, great people, but it's not something I do, and I've never done it. So,
So, so from the Adolphus, you end up at Neiman Marcus for 28, 29, 30 years?
you know, I wanted a forever job. I wanted to get out of the hotel business. I didn't want to work evenings. I didn't want to work weekends. I didn't want to work holidays because I did all that for 15 years. I never had a life. So I searched out the job that I thought would be a pretty cool job. And I called the guy who I ultimately wound up taking his job. And I said to him, I said, I'd like to have lunch with you. Would you please sit down with me? And he sat down with me and he told me he's given his retirement notice tomorrow. And I was like, really? Hmm. Okay. So I applied for his job, and nobody called me back from Neiman's. So I was like, okay, not where I want to be. So I called one other person, a guy by the name of Marcel Desaulniers, who recently passed away. He owned a restaurant in Colonial Williamsburg called The Trellis. And I called Marcel and I said, Marcel, I'm looking for a job. And he hooked me up with the Woodstock Inn in Woodstock, Vermont. I went to work for Lawrence Rockefeller for a year. And we left Dallas. We moved to Woodstock, and I could stay in Woodstock forever. It was absolutely the perfect place for us as a family. We bought a farmhouse. We had a great place up there. And then Neiman's calls me like 3 months after I get to Woodstock. And I'm like, what is going on here? So, anyway, they interview me. I fly to Dallas, and to make a long story short, I wind up moving back to Dallas before the end of 1994. So I literally moved to Woodstock in January of '94. By November, I'm back in Dallas, and I replaced myself. So thankfully, my predecessor stayed 5 years, so that was perfect for them, and that's what really got me connected to the Northeast. Um, so my wife and I would continue to come up here in the fall and spend time in New England. But so Neiman's calls in 1994. I go to work there. I'm the third food director since 1953. So the restaurants at Neiman
Wow.
started in '53 by Stanley Marcus. And now the company started in '07, restaurants '53. I'm the third food director. So there was Helen Corbett, who was a lot like the early Julia Child, and then there was my predecessor, and then there was me. So there's a lot of history. When I got
How many
there,
restaurants were you responsible
well,
for, or did they
I was
have?
going to say when I got there, I think there was like 15 maybe, and when I left, there was about 50. And so we went
550.
5-0, yeah. And that's not counting little bars and coffee shops and things like that, but 50 full-blown restaurants. We also owned the Bergdorf Goodman brand, so I had 3 restaurants at Bergdorf, and I had restaurants from New York to Honolulu. So and a lot of those were opened in the '90s when I got there. So, well, think about it. We opened and closed probably 40 or 50 restaurants in 30 years that I was there. But it was probably one of the best jobs because not only could I put the chef coat on and go into the kitchens when I would travel, but I could also then wear a suit and do other things and run the business. And so for me it was more about just running the restaurant business than being in the kitchen. The kitchen was something that I enjoyed, I love to this day. It's a passion, but for me it was really leading people and trying to make or mentor people, and really try to help the generation behind us, because to me that was so important. I had 900 associates when we were running restaurants, and I know that because when we closed for COVID, I laid off 890 of them. And and reading your book it brought just a flood of memories back of what we went through, and the moments when we thought there was hope and then there wasn't. So I laid off 890 people. And they came to me and they said, well, what are you going to do? What can you do now that the restaurants are closed? And I said, well, we can stay engaged with top clients. So we started sending chocolate chip cookies to all of our top clients around the country. And that's what I did for 4 or 5 months. And we grew this cookie business. I don't know if you ever heard of the chocolate chip cookie urban myth, but there was this urban myth when I got to Neiman's, that Neiman's charged somebody $250 for a chocolate chip cookie recipe. And so I get to Neiman's and I get literally the first week on the job, I get this letter and it says, how dare you charge, my friend $250 for a recipe? And so I asked somebody in my office and they said, oh, it's an urban myth. Send it down to PR. They'll send them a letter. Well, that was 1994, '95. And then the internet came, and that chain letter, that urban myth chain letter, went viral on the internet. And so
And became somewhat of a reality.
it became how it became a reality is I wrote a recipe. We didn't have a recipe. So I went in the kitchen and wrote a chocolate chip cookie recipe. Now, nobody at PR wanted me to do it, but I did it anyway. And I grew that business. I mean, we now sell probably 500,000 chocolate chip cookies a year at Neiman's. Okay. So, but then during COVID, we were drop shipping them around the country. We were shipping them all over the world. So it was, that was one of my aha moments like you had during COVID, right? So it was some of the fun things that came out of such a horrible time in our life. Yep.
And you hired them all back. And I remember talking to you, and you were thinking about, we're getting older, you're thinking about retiring, and you couldn't leave because you wanted to get the people back and established.
Well, you know what happened? A lot of people left the business, right? So of those 890 people, I think I only got to bring back in waves, maybe the first 150.
Right.
And then a lot of the top performers, your best associates, they didn't take unemployment. They went out and found other jobs. So, I lost some really, really key people around the country. So, not, like we were building back the business with smaller menus and doing what we could with supply chain issues, but yeah, I felt a real need to not abandon ship. And trust me, it would have been a whole lot easier walking away then. But I dug my heels in and wanted to bring them back in a way that I could walk away in a couple of years and say I feel confident that they're back on track, and that's what I did.
That's commendable because I know that you could have left easily
Yeah.
and ridden off into the sunset.
Well, I mean, you said it in your book the best, I mean, we were not essential businesses, okay?
Hmm.
And we paid the price for that. And people kind of take restaurants and dining out for granted, and then all of a sudden you couldn't do it anymore. So,
Yep.
when you think about that, it was a tough moment. And like you said in your books, it's like it's kind of humbling when somebody tells you you're non-essential anymore. You know, it's just
Yeah, you've got your whole life invested in it, and all of a sudden it's non-essential.
yeah. Well, it is for me and my family, by the way. But no, it's I really enjoy following your book especially through the COVID moment. I mean, how cool for you to want to write a book in 2020 and then all of a sudden COVID hit and
It
that
was
like your book kind of took a different turn there for a while.
it
Yeah.
was dumb luck.
But you got to document it. I mean, that's what's
Yes.
so cool. And I think, when you talk about, I wrote a few books. I think I wrote 4 cookbooks.
I was going to ask you how many cookbooks
Yeah, I wrote
you've
4
written.
of them. I wrote one at the Adolphus and 3 at Neiman's. And I have to say, I don't know about you, but I love the process of writing the books. I enjoyed the whole digging in. I hired photographers, I hired stylists, I hired a ghostwriter with me, just the whole group. And luckily for us at Neiman's, I was able to get a big advance. In other words, and that helped me put a lot of people together on the book, which helps, right? Um, but when I was sitting with Stanley Marcus. Stanley Marcus became a pretty good friend of mine. And now, just a little history on Stanley. Stanley's father started Neiman Marcus, Herbert Marcus Sr. And Stanley comes along. I think he was born in like '07, I guess the year the stores were open. And then Stanley, when I got to Neiman's in '94, Stanley had already left the company, but he spent a lot of time there. It wasn't long before he reached out to me, a matter of weeks before he wanted to have lunch with me. And at that point, he was in his late 80s. Stanley, I think, died at the age of 94 or 95. And he was still very much around.
He was active.
Oh my gosh, the guy was on fire, and he loved chefs. He loved food. So he was always in the restaurants, and he traveled, and he would send me these little mementos, like he sent me a bar cocktail napkin from like Buenos Aires, or he would send me a menu from New York, or one day he sent me this to go sandwich bag, and with a note it said, American Airlines has stopped paying attention to their food, and so have I. So I have my driver stop at Eats New York City, and I get this sandwich to take on the plane, and this bag doesn't leak and it doesn't smell, and I really think you should take a look at these for your business. So I would get all this stuff in interoffice mail from Stanley Marcus. So we became pretty good friends. I got to spend a lot of time with him when I wrote the first cookbook in 2002, 2001. And So I would ask him so many questions, and a guy like that just pouring it out was just amazing for me. And so I was very excited. But I love the whole process of writing the books. Now, Stanley told me, don't write a book unless you plan to sell it. So, it's not an ego project. He wanted me to really understand that, right? So I was able to sell books, and luckily at Neiman's I think I sold probably 250,000 cookbooks, and it was, and then
So did you go on an author's tour
oh yeah,
around
oh
the
yeah,
country and
oh
all
yeah.
the Neiman Marcuses, and you do book signings and
It's humbling, when you get to your first store and you have them set you up and there's all these books and then nobody's there, you know, and I'm like, hmm. And so the second day I'm on a book tour, I said to the chef, I said, I want a big plate of chocolate chip cookies and bring them out to me. And then once the cookies came out, then people started coming. Okay. So word to the wise, have food if you're going to especially if you're going to do a cookbook. So I gave cookies away. We sold a ton of books. And the publisher, I was with Random House, and division of that, Clarkson Potter. And the first cookbook, we bought 50,000 books to sell. And by November, we launched the book. I guess it was beginning of October. By the end of November, by Thanksgiving week, we were sold out. We were getting to the end of the books, and it was that much of a hit. And so I go back to Clarkson Potter, and they didn't have any books. They didn't do an overprint. So it was pretty embarrassing on their part. And you'll appreciate this. They had to print the books in the United States. So that was an expense. Okay. But they got books out in 10 days. And we bought it. We
wow.
put another 50,000 books out there. And then they realized the power of the brand. Now, when you sell that many books, you should be on the New York Times bestseller list, but I couldn't because we sold them all within Neiman Marcus and on the Neiman Marcus website. So we never got credit for that. But I would go into bookstores. I don't know about you, but I would go into bookstores and find my book on the shelf, and I would like pull them out and put them front and center. And then if I really liked the person, I'd explain to them who I was, and they're like, "Oh, can you sign them?" And then I would
Sign a
sign them,
copy.
right?
Yeah.
So, it was always important. And then the other thing too, when you do book tours, it's kind of funny for all those people that do book tours, I guess. But anyway, you get there and all the books are there, and maybe you don't sell through them. But what I would do is I would sign them all, and then whoever had them owned them. So they would have to sell, but they sold. Nobody ever complained
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, it's a lot of fun, and also just doing a lot of cooking classes. I did a ton of cooking classes with people, and as a matter of fact, I had a cooking studio for probably 15 years in one of the stores in Dallas. And it was, I mean, always sold out, and it was always a lot of fun to do dinners and have wine tastings. I mean, that's how I spent my life eating and drinking, and it's not a bad way to be.
Not a bad way to live. So I got a few questions that are pertinent to the show, which is your trophy moment. You've done a lot of things, a lot of accomplishments. What was your trophy moment? Did you win a special award, or was there an event?
I didn't know that this was a trophy moment at the moment until other people started talking about it. So in 1989, 90, the Queen of England and Prince Philip came to Dallas for a visit, and they stayed at our hotel. And my wife and I were like their private, valets. So I was doing tea for them and breakfast for them and snacks for them, and got to meet the queen and the prince. And I didn't realize at that moment how cool that was, but I remember shaking the queen's hand. She put her hand out, and she had gloves on, and it was like she had pads in her gloves. Okay. And I just remember, gently squeezing her hand and feeling it. And then, so I didn't know that that was kind of a cool moment
That was a
until my
that's a
mother's
big thing.
friends started talking about it. And it was like, "Oh, you met the queen." And I was like, "Yeah, I did. But I mean, we just fed her, and I met a lot of people, but and especially at Neiman's, you sign this intent at Neiman's that if you don't ask anybody for for signatures. No autograph.
No autographs.
So, I mean, we would meet all kinds of people, but there was no pictures, no autographs at Neiman Marcus because that's where, people came to shop. And so, while I opened up great wines and champagnes for people, it was just purely in the moment. Okay. But yeah, I guess the Queen and the Prince, I mean, he was a pretty cool guy. He was a little tired when I got to him, and he was like, come on, let's just get this show on the road. So, he wanted his cocktail, and she wanted her, I think it was called Malvern water. So, yeah, that was probably one of the biggest moments in my life, says many other people.
Um, First, so you've done a lot of things. You've been around the world. What's something that you've always wanted to do and haven't done yet, and will you do it?
Oh, well, right now I'm spending the summer in Maine, and I need to catch a striper on a fly rod. Okay, so so you know
Never done that before.
what's that?
Never done that before.
I've never caught a striper on a fly rod. Okay, caught him on spinning reels, caught him on a deep sea rig. Now at the end of last year, I bought this gorgeous fly rod, and my son just got me a striper fly rod book yesterday for Father's Day. So to me, the goal this year, and I will make sure I mail it a picture, send a picture. And for me, the slot limit here is 28 to 31 inches, so it's a small slot. So for me to be able to land a keeper, not just anyone, I want a keeper.
So you want to keep
I
her.
want to keep her so that I could clean it, cook it, and enjoy it. Okay, so that's going to hopefully be a first for me this summer.
Well, we'll end on that. I don't know many people have caught stripers with fly rods before. But I can't wait to see the picture. I can't wait to hear about how well you cooked it. And I appreciate you spending the time with us on my podcast. Kevin Garvin, my friend and executive chef. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Keith. Great seeing you.
All right,
Take
see
care,
you,
buddy.
Kevin.
Bye-bye.